Hello and welcome to another Daily Muppet. Got a fair bit to cover now, and now that our season is finally and fortunately concluded, we can move on to what is hopefully a better off-season than the season that just occurred on the pitch. Obviously, we've had Ten Hag now formally introduced, formally presented with his interview, with his first press conference, and I think we could take away some basic impressions of the press conference. Obviously not too much in detail, but there's a little bit to talk about. I mean, first and foremost, in terms of his attitude, how he carries himself and presents himself, I think it was good that he was confident but not arrogant. He didn't seem starstruck or have some of the, happy to be here vibes that Ole gave. Not to be critical of that because I didn't really mind it, but a good middle ground of someone who was confident, and I think that's good. He faced the press quite well, obviously did not really bend to them or give in or seem to be thrown off by anything that they said in the questions that they asked. And these are all good things for a United manager, as managing the press and being in front of everybody is just an important aspect to it, whether you like it or not. I found an interesting answer to the question about Ronaldo, what do you expect from him, when he said goals, and that was it. It's funny because you talk about strikers right now, and we'll talk about Darwin Nunez a little later, and people these days tend to be, especially on the web, on Twitter and places like that, so over analytical with regards to what a striker is and what they're there for. I liked his simple answer of goals. A striker's first and foremost and top priority over anything else imaginable is to score goals. People get way too invested in all of the different things that they can do and whether they're a perfect all-around player, when more than anything else, the importance of a striker is to score goals, and don't forget that. He didn't have much to say on Ralf Rangnick, which isn't a surprise at the moment. Won't read too much into that, but you're getting all the stories now, and some of them sure are hit pieces and shifting the blame onto him for the way the season went, and some are otherwise. But I will say the story that came out over the weekend about someone, Lars Kornetka, not even employed by the club, viewing things on TV, calling in on match days and during games and getting down to Armas with his AirPods on the sideline, is one of the worst things I've ever heard in terms of coaching. It's absolutely absurd and ridiculous that was happening. And I've had it as well confirmed that it's true. It's definitely true. And to me, that's crazy. It's crazy that could be happening. It's crazy that a professional, supposedly manager, would be doing that. And it's no wonder with things like that going on that Ralph had very little respect from the players, because it's just nuts. And I think that there's probably more to it behind the scenes. I've spoken about this before. Obviously, again, Ralph's experience and ideas are not necessarily on the pitch. And some of the things he said sure are decent, but he might be the worst coach I've ever seen. And the results are the telling tale of that as well. But let's move on to the next part. Talk about transfers. Because that's the main thing in terms of moving forward. The other things that Ten Hag talked about in his press conference, complimenting Harry Maguire, which some people won't like, but I think most people are willing to accept whatever Ten Hag says right now, and that's the right way to go about it. I think Harry Maguire is going to be a very useful and effective player under Ten Hag, all said and done, but we will see. So moving on to transfers, let's first talk about Timber, because obviously this is one that's very kind of hot at the moment. I think I know some people out there are jumping the gun in terms of where it's at, claiming everything's finished, and it isn't. Our information, as I've said, and I think we were well ahead of practically everybody on this from the beginning, were that there were contacts with his representatives very early on. There's a willingness to join. They've sounded and kind of gone through the basics of what it would take for him to come on a personal note. It's between the clubs, but that may still be through a third party intermediaries. It may accelerate over the next few days to a week if they move ahead with it into more direct contacts. But it's not something that's going to be some drawn out negotiation. That's not how transfers work with Ajax. If there's a willingness from the player, the talks with the clubs will be very fast, and they will either pay what Ajax want or around there with a decent, good, workable offer, or they will not. And I don't think you'll see a long, drawn-out thing on this. It's something that can and should go very fast. The information that we had latest on it was that it's something they do think could be done quickly. That should be the first of the summer if they just pay what is asked by Ajax. And that is basically what it is. They know what the price would be from sounding it out. If they formalize the interest now with a concrete offer, then it should get done. But it's not done. It's not agreed. The offer has not been made. It's not going to take a bunch of, like I said, a bunch of talks back and forth, because it's just not how Ajax worked. That's not how talks for Donny van de Beek worked. That's not how talks for Frenkie de Jong to Barcelona originally worked. The fee was just set and they paid it or not. And the same with Matthijs de Ligt as well. So you just have to think with how transfers work with Ajax as well. It's not a drawn out process. And so it's something that could move very fast. But as of yet, it hasn't reached a stage. From one of our best sources, he would know when it reaches a stage where it is, the offer's there and it's in and they think it's going to be accepted. It's not there yet, but hopefully we have updates in the next few days. It could move quickly if they decide to formalize that and move ahead and pay what Ajax want. So we'll see there. I'm just remaining cautious because it's important to do so at this point in time. It was confirmed by some people like Jonathan Schrager on Twitter that there were talks with his representatives, that his representative wanted to know United's plan, again, to find out, was the plan, essentially, if you understand that, is the plan to move ahead with the deal? Because they know the outline of what it would cost. And so, is the plan to move ahead with that and pay, and when? Or are they going to wait for things like moving Eric Bailly or selling Wan-Bissaka in order for this to happen, in order to move forward with the deal, which you've seen a lot of stories out recently. So just be wary and don't get too overly anxious about the time. It could move very fast. It could take a little bit, but I don't think a long period of time until we have some concrete news on this, but it isn't done yet. Pau Torres, another name on the list, and I have good reason to believe that he is on the move, that there are talks occurring with his club for a transfer. No details on that, not sure where, I just believe that is the case. That there's active discussions for him to be on the move. It could be to Madrid, it could be to Chelsea, it could be to Bayern. Hopefully, if we do hear something about that soon. But if news starts to come out that United are in talks with Pau Torres, I might believe it, because there are talks with his club and other clubs over a move right now. So then let's move on to Frenkie de Jong. It's a big one because I actually have some, again, new news on this from a great source. Frenkie de Jong's situation is that United are pushing ahead cautiously. And what I mean by that is this week they intend to more formally sound out what the price, more formally talk to Barcelona and find out what it would actually take to get a deal done in terms of the cost. So that's it. Again, as I mentioned before, the previous reports were very overstated in terms of how far it was along. They didn't have any formal talks between the clubs. They hadn't really worked out the pricing. They hadn't done any of that because they didn't have a willingness from Frenkie de Jong. There's been some more conversations with Frenkie de Jong, as we've reported. I don't know yet of any change in his willingness to join United. And we'll talk about the problem with that in a moment. But United at least have it open enough at the moment to look forward to what could be the fee for a deal. Again, that could change in an instant. They could get formally rejected. They could just decide, you know what, we're not pursuing this and totally back off. Or worse, you're getting reports now with Campos joining PSG and Mbappe staying, and it looks like Paul Pogba turning them down and going to Juventus, that PSG may be entering the race for Frenkie de Jong. PSG was the second choice to Barcelona when Frenkie de Jong left Ajax originally, It's a club he talked about that he would love to play for in the past. They can offer Champions League. They can offer a spot. And that is tricky. Because, again, as I've said, the latest we've heard in his personal preference is going to a club like that can offer Champions League now, and all of that would be his preference. And I don't think he would turn down Paris Saint-Germain if they were to come in with an offer. So this could be a dead deal in a matter of days if PSG go ahead with that. And I don't know what PSG are going to do. I'm just going there based off of reports. So, but United are moving ahead cautiously. Maybe that means they feel there's some encouragement or some willingness from the other party. I do believe from an outside source that it would cost about £50 million for Frenkie de Jong. But I think United intend to determine that themselves. There's a lot of issues with the midfield and the defensive midfielder options. They're running kind of thin. I mean, start out with Declan Rice being a major option, and I want to mention that the only way Declan Rice happens now, because West Ham do need to sell, they do need to raise some funds, they do need to rebuild their squad, is if Declan Rice formally requests a transfer. I think it's more likely they sell Bowen for a good fee to add to their pool and to rebuild a little bit than Declan Rice this summer. Obviously, it's been sort of done to death. The only way it comes back on the table is if Declan Rice formally requests a transfer. But the issue is, then Tchouaméni, you're seeing talks with Real Madrid. As I've said all along, they wanted him. I never believed for a moment that they weren't interested. And that's a problem. Then you go down to Calvin Phillips, who's next on the list. With Leeds staying up, the price is around £60 million, which is a huge overpay for Calvin Phillips and not likely to be done, but that's sort of where United are at. They've got to keep moving down the list or overpay for a player like Calvin Phillips. It's tricky, though, because in terms of what they do next, they've got to do it right, because what you really don't want to have happen this summer, and people will say, well, it's fine, just buy 2 midfielders. You don't just want to buy 2 depth players. We've got Fred. We've got Scott McTominay. You have James Garner. If you buy 2 more depth players, this is how you end up with the bloated squad where you don't have starter quality players, but you have so many players in that you cannot get players on top of it. That the wages are high, that the squad numbers are high, and you cannot end up buying starters. So what to me looks like a potential plan is, if you're not getting a top defensive midfielder this year, push ahead for Frenkie de Jong and try to get a top center mid like him and buy a more affordable defensive midfielder so that next summer you could buy a top DM and you already have a good starting center mid. So that there's no bloat and you're not ending up with just a bunch more depth signings. You want to sign at the top, hopefully, and push down. In the DM position, because we have none, you could afford to buy a depth player, but you cannot afford to buy a depth player at defensive midfielder and at center mid. So, that's one of the ways that it could go. But if they cannot get Frenkie de Jong, then I wouldn't be surprised to see one midfielder come in, and it could be someone like just to upgrade the pivot. And it could be a defensive midfielder, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's just a player who may upgrade the pivot. Ten Hag plays a 4-2-3-1 as well. If you get a player like Timber who can tuck in, then maybe you forego that specialist DM this summer. I know that's crazy and kind of terrible to say again, but if you bring in someone like Ruben Neves or someone similar to that, or Conrad Lamer, you're kind of upgrading the pivot because they're better than Scott McTominay. And they could play with Fred, but you're still probably looking at needing a top DM next summer then, and it would still make sense. So I think that's kind of the way that it's going to go. For other DMs potentially to look at, the barely only other ones I've heard mentioned are Paulinho, but it's such a tenuous link, and I'm just not sure that there's really anything in it. I'd be curious for them to look at players like Douglas Luiz, who, Aston Villa just signed Kamara, so maybe he's available. I don't know that he's great, but would he be an improvement? Probably. So that's what I think on that. It's sort of a complicated situation now. At striker, with PSG, keeping Mbappe, of course, takes them out of the race, but it does enter the potentially Real Madrid, per reports in Spain and Portugal, for Darwin Núñez. I don't know that it's true that Madrid won't go for a striker just because they have Benzema, They were going for Haaland and they were going for Mbappe. So obviously they were intending to buy a striker. For all the talk of that, some people don't want Darwin Nunez again. Now you have a top club, PSG wanted him, and now you have a top club in Real Madrid looking at him as an option per some pretty good reports in Spain and in Portugal. So, it's a little scary, but I'd keep an eye on it for now. I don't know much that it's a real interest yet. For Madrid, you'd probably keep an eye on players like Salah or Mane or Kane, depending on what happens in Tottenham. Raheem Sterling, who could be on the move from City. There could be a large ripple effect here in terms of how things move and how things switch. The biggest advantage United have at the moment in the striker market, specifically on a player like Nunez, and why they need to move quick, is pretty much everyone else is contingent on selling. And remember this, David Ornstein, back in April, named United, PSG, and Chelsea as the three clubs who are kind of leading, with United as the front runner, for Darwin Nunez. Well, PSG are out. Chelsea still have to formalize their takeover, and they need to probably sell Lukaku, and they have to deal with the future of a player like Broha in order to get a striker. At the time, it mentioned that none of the clubs could technically move forward yet, so they were just initial talks because United hadn't appointed Ten Hag yet. Well, now they've appointed Ten Hag. Now it's official. Now they could move forward with it. And I'd like to mention that it isn't casual when David Ornstein drops a name like that and says that there's talks and says that they're front runners. I went back through David Ornstein's the best probably in the world in reporting right now on football transfer news in general, so he doesn't drop names by accident. But I went through last summer and before, and from his own information, he linked United with 4 players. Sancho, with Kane as a backup if we didn't get Sancho, but we did. Rafael Varane, who United signed, and Kieran Trippier, they would have signed in January if not for the gambling thing, and then his price went up because of the extension in his contract, because of playing the games and winning the title, and they still nearly got him in summer, except the price had ballooned to a ridiculous 40 million, but they made a good offer. So if Ornstein is putting United in the race, it's a good confirmation that there's interest, that there's context, that there's been talks, and it's not one to ignore. I think it at least confirms their information about the interest, the talks, and where it's at. But it's really coming down now to if there's other clubs coming in for them, whether it presses ahead, whether Benfica look to accept kind of the price that United would be willing to pay, or they continue to try to drive it up. But they do need an early deal as well, per his information. So I don't think they can wait until July or until next fiscal year or until other clubs start to make some moves and sales. So it still could be one that's there. So just to keep an eye on that, but I don't have anything new there yet or to say that it's well advanced or anything like that. News will start to come obviously fast, and we might do these on the daily moving forward. I'm at the moment looking for any sort of update with regards to any of the personal discussions with Jong and his willingness, as I think that's where could be the biggest development soon. And I'll definitely, put things out on Twitter and all that if things happen quickly, as they might moving forward. So keep an eye on all the channels. Beyond that, as I mentioned with the defensive midfielder market slimming, put some names in the comments below. I haven't heard links to many others yet, but I will be reaching out and asking what other names could be possible. What would you think about names like Douglas Luiz or Paulinho for a season as a bit of a stopgap, since we need 2 players in that position and could sign another next year? Are there other names you'd want me to ask and look into that are actually somewhat potentially real? But that could be paired with Fred or paired with Frankie de Jong or, in that kind of midfield. So make sure to, comment below with your thoughts on that. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn notifications on, and I'll see you in the next video.